Welcome back to our very special Lucy Simons celebration. This is episode 4, The Making of Dr. Zhivago. We are thrilled to welcome Zhivago lyricists Michael Korie and Amy Powers, book writer Michael Weller, arranger Eric Stern, and host Loraine Alterman Boyle, former Rolling Stone writer and editor, as well as a producer on the musical Dr. Zhivago. We will also hear Sierra Boggess and Ramin Karimloo performing the gorgeous song On the Edge of Time. Let's begin.
The one thing I wanted to start out with is Zhivago itself, which was an enormous task to do. And I think the impetus, Lucy said, came from her love of the book and the movie. So could you tell us how you got involved with Lucy?
I had spoken to Lucy some years before about working on Little House on the Prairie with her, but I was tied up on some projects and I couldn't make myself available. So time went by, and then she got back in touch and said, no, it wasn't her. I think it was Des got in touch and said, guess what? We're doing Dr. Zhivago as a musical. And I was sort of overwhelmed. It was one of my mother's favorite books. And it was, I remember the movie, but my memory of the movie was that it was a very handsome man watching a very beautiful girl with lots of snow. And I couldn't think what the story would be. So I read the book, and then I was even more overwhelmed by the challenge. And I went to meet her and said, look, I don't see that this material as it stands can be the stuff of a musical. What is it going to be like that I have to add stuff? I'm dealing with one of the great writers in the world, and yet the story's not quite clicking. What are the rules about that? How do I add on to greatness like that? And she said, let's work it out as we go along. So that, with that reassurance, I said, okay, fine, I'll have a go.
Good. And then I'll pick up with how then they spoke to me, and I met with Lucy and Michael and Des, and I thought it was insane to try and do the Russian Revolution in a musical. But on the other hand, the insane things are the ones that appeal to me, and that when you don't know the solution, then it brings out the most creativity. And I think at the first meeting, Michael said he had a concept that he could start out with the gunshot, where an unidentified woman shoots another man and then work back from that. I thought that was a great concept. Lucy and I started to work, and it wasn't quite clicking. And Lucy said, I heard about this another lyricist, Amy Powers. Why don't you do co-lyrics? At the same time, I was doing Grey Gardens and The Grapes of Wrath, and I said, yes, thank God. And when Amy came on, it felt totally complete. And then Eric, I knew from Far From Heaven and Grey Gardens, and dying always to work with Eric. So then and Des was our team leader, and Lucy was amazing. Really kept us all together through thick and thin.
I came into this with, a combination of pop lyricist and theater lyricist background. And when I heard that I could collaborate with Michael Korie, I was all over it. And what I was bringing to this, I was going to say table, but it's really puzzle. What I was bringing to the puzzle was the more female sensibility in terms of lyrics, and the more passionate love story side of it. Because I'm a sucker for that. And so I jumped in, and I remember that as an audition, they had me write a lyric. And so I did, and that lyric was When the Music Played. Mm-hmm. And Lucy immediately heard melodies for that. And so that was the defining moment for us all to work as a team together. And I've never experienced anyone like Lucy in terms of her unending passion for the material, and devotion to the project and seeing it through.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to play with these great guys, which was really fun.
Lucy didn't have the music at that point. You just did the lyric, and then she did the music, or?
One of the beautiful things about Lucy is that she could work either way. So many composers are very rigid. They either have their melodies laid out and you have to fill in the blanks, or they wait for you and then they create
Mm-hmm.
melodies around your lyrics. But with Lucy, it worked both ways.
It's true. And it's actually worked a third way, which is that the group would sit around and say, what is this moment about? We would come up with an intriguing hook, and Lucy would say, let me take the first stab at it. And so she would use the hook or the title of the song, and from that, the structure would evolve. She would take a lyric, go to music, and then kick it back to lyrics.
And then Michael and I would sit there on opposite coasts most of the time, Michael, Korie, and I, and bat back and forth, sometimes a dozen times in a day, different versions of what we thought would work lyrically, and then re-present them to Lucy, and we'd go back and forth like that.
Right, and then by that time, she had already changed the music. So
or sometimes we would say, what about if it went all the way up here at the end? And she'd say, oh yeah, I can work that in.
And Eric, tell us where you came in to this immense project.
I got to meet Lucy through a friend who was working with her, I believe, on Little House on the Prairie at the time she was developing that. And I started working with her when she started working on Zhivago. And what intrigued me about Lucy and what ultimately binded me to her was the fact that her sense of melody and theatricalism was, in a certain way, almost always tied into the human voice. And her inspiration, her melodic sense, her dramatic sense came from her need to sing. She'd been singing her whole life. Like almost everybody in this business, I wanted to be a writer. I was a semi-decent lyricist, but oddly enough, not a very good composer. And I'm a very trained musician, and I have skill in that sense, in that area. But I met Lucy and I realized that she had something that I could never even come close to. And that was I don't know where that gift comes from, but it was the gift to express in the human voice what she felt as a human being. And I was able to work with what she gave me. And so grateful to have it, because I couldn't ever have done that myself. So I actually found a creative partner that sustained me and kept me, that sort of filled in what I couldn't possibly do. And it was like that for over 20 years. We just kept knocking out versions of it. And she'd come up with me with ideas and things sort of scratched on paper, and we'd talk about what you want. And the thing about Lucy is, although not always as skilled on the minutia of music writing, she always knew what she wanted. And if I came back at her with something, she said, no, that's not really it. And she would show me. So it wasn't as if she was malleable. On the other hand, I mean, like all creative artists, she has a very strong point of view. But working with her, I was able to help her realize that. And it was, like I said, it was a symbiotic relationship. It is a symbiotic relationship. It's wonderful.
So in the process, Michael Weller, when you come in with the storyline, which I don't know how you did it, having read the book a long time ago, how does this work with the three of them? How did you start writing, knocking out the script, and then bringing it back and seeing what music there is? Or
it was never that formal somehow. We would meet a lot, and another thing is that Lucy, among other things, I think has the heart of a natural restaurateur and kind of someone who wants to feed you and take care of you. She has this sort of maternal
very maternal,
and she loved gathering people. Yeah, so it would be as much, you'd go for the food, and then everybody would sort of start talking. And for me, what the critical challenge is that Zhivago really is a stand-in for Pasternak, and it's always tricky when an author writes themselves into a book because they think lots of wonderful things, but they don't do much. So you have to provide all that when you're writing the stories, so people have something to wonder about as an action. How is this going to come out? And that's what I felt was the hardest thing, was to make what I understood to be, in every possible way you can understand, a passive responder to a historical moment, and turn him into an active seeker of something we could watch and cheer on, and do it without desecrating his sensibility in some way. I had to stay as true as I could to what I thought was prompting him. And his life, it's very interesting. I got to know quite a bit about how he actually functioned in the world, and I started to feel that the book is both masterful and chaotic at the same time. And one of the things that would be very interesting to do was to try to see through the chaos to what was a consistent story of his life unfolding, because he really did have an affair, and it was really with somebody who was extremely difficult to capture. And it really was that she was beautiful because of how he saw her, not so much what she was, but she was extremely strong, and she was extremely dedicated and courageous. And that became the kind of tools I had to work with. So when we'd meet, they would say, I was thinking of a song like this. And I'd think, oh, yeah, that would be, I see how one could get there. And I see how one could make, for example, to be concrete, you have an affair that's developing over 2.5 hours. It can't just be that they jump into bed because they're both married. So you have to really, sort of tease and extend and pull the taffy out as long as you can. But at the same time, you have to show them in love. So we had to come up with feints and tricks, like having them discover a letter that someone had written to the person they were in love with and sing it to each other. So they're really singing a letter that wasn't the two of them, but we know the audience knows it's really the two of them talking to each other. So it's things like that where we kind of legalize an illicit love affair in front of the audience's face.
As I recall, what came first before any scenes was an outline. And there was a lot of talk about that outline, a lot of hammering out, talking through the story over and over, where Michael would improvise ideas like coming up with the letter at one meeting. But I think by the time all of this outlining and discussing of the story and boiling it down like in a crucible occurred, I think we all knew what was important, which was that it was a love story, but it was the story of the importance of art in our lives and how an artist can change societies more than a Putin. I always think it's great if the politics of the world we live in can come through in another story, but in a stealthy way. It's not underlined in red. You come to realize this is about us right here, now, our lives. And we always knew we were working towards that end of Zhivago coming back from the dead to inspire us and inspire a repressed society with his poetry. And we had feelings like that in our country. I also remember that through this outline, Amy and I would come up with wonderful lyrics that maybe were a bit too expository at times. And Michael and Lucy would always push us towards the emotional and the melodic. And the simpler hooks worked best for us. Like Michael came up with an idea of, who is she? Such a simple idea. Or watch the moon. Very simple ideas, but the more simple you get, the closer you can get to the heart. And the less expository you have to be. And so we would say, let's deal with the emotion. Let Lucy move us with that. and let's let Michael take care of the exposition.
I mean, I listen to stuff now and I'm crying, but that song is just so magnificent. Still brings tears to my eyes, and I think that's what you accomplished.
That was a song that, yeah, that was a song that Lucy originated. And she just felt it, and it didn't have a lyric at all or even a hook. And it moved around the show. And one time it was in the beginning, one time it was in the middle, once it was a duet, and it finally found its proper place. And Amy, do you remember we were all in Lucy's living room killing ourselves to find
title.
the right hook? And maybe it was Michael, the right title. And I think Michael suggested the idea of time. And somehow we got, okay, the edge of time, and it evolved, and then we would run off into one of the bedrooms and write some lyrics.
And I'd eat.
And drink that fantastic
And you'd eat,
espresso, cappuccino. So it was just like that. It was, okay, let's all put our heads together and our hearts together and figure out what needs to be said in this moment. I remember for On the Edge of Time, there must have been 100 different possible title ideas. And Des McAnuff was there too in that room. And he kept saying, no, not that one. No, not that one.
And we fully wrote 3 different versions of it in different spots of the show. I wrote one, you wrote another, and we fought for them, we believed in them, but that was the way the team worked. Everyone had to agree or we couldn't proceed.
Here are Sierra Boggess and Ramin Karimloo singing On the Edge of Time.
Hi, Lucy. Just want to say how much I love you and what a gift you have given music theater and just our hearts and souls with 2 of my favorite shows, The Secret Garden and Dr. Zhivago, which I get to sing with this beautiful lady here, my favorite leading lady, which we got to do Secret Garden together. And now we got to sing from Dr. Zhivago finally.
Yeah, that's right. Finally.
All thanks to you. We love you. We adore you. And you are a gift.
Amen.
Amen. Did you say?
Amen. Amen.
When you spoke, you broke me open, set my mind and body soaring. Every word I still remember, every whisper carries through.
You were always there, beyond the dark, lighting my existence. You, my answered prayer, my midnight sun, glowing in the distance, daring me to dream, blazing from afar. One star to guide me through till I was here on the edge of time with you.
You showed me a place where love was real, not a mere illusion. One unguarded space my heart could heal from its mad confusion, sheltered from the storm in your warm embrace. Oh, grace I never knew. I know at last, on the edge of time with you.
All the pain, all the years of silent despair, all at once disappear like mist in the air, like mist in the air. Let me share unhabitable
by the way, it is worth bringing Des into this at this point, because I think I had very little experience with musical theater. I'd started in college writing musicals, and I did the film version of Hair. But the real nitty gritty of working on a musical, the economy of it, what works musically and what doesn't, that was just a kind of tabula rasa for me. And Des had very definite ideas about that. And and he's also a playwright. So I found his instinct for storytelling really instructive. I learned a lot from the experience. And I learned a lot about using music in a musical from Michael and Amy and Lucy. So for me, it was school as much as anything.
Des was cinematic in his approach to theater, and he was about transitions, keeping the energy of the story going by cutting off the big applause moments and making that transition as exciting to the audience as a scene. And I think sometimes that was a source of conflict because Lucy liked to end everything big. And Des wanted to keep it going. But we found a happy medium, and through the workshop procedure, Des was a wonderfully inspiring. Amy and Lucy and I were sitting in the back of the Black Box Theater at La Jolla, and Des would come rushing up to us before the show was over and say, "You got to change this, and that, and the other, and you've got to leave the theater and do it now, because the actors have to have their rewrites by equity rules before they go home. I can't rehearse it tomorrow if they don't get it tonight." So off we ran and wrote something new every night. And Lucy was game for that. Lucy was always willing to re-examine everything.
So that's a really important thing. She wasn't one of those, she is not one of those people who's precious about their work. There are many composers, and we don't have to name them, who just think that their first thing is the right thing, or that they're the ones who should have all the power in the situation. And Lucy was always really fluid about that, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that so much about her, because in the midst of, despite her having such passion and impulses in certain directions, she was always open to having her mind changed. And how often does that happen in life? Not very often. Not even in theater, but in life in general. People like to stick to their guns.
It's what defines a good collaboration, actually, that willingness to be able to keep. There's an old saying that musicals aren't written, they're rewritten. You never really finish it. Somebody says you're done, and that's what you have. Quick story, which you can...
The money ran out. That's it, right.
Quick story, which you can easily cut out. We were preparing to go to Sydney with a version of Zhivago that we ended up opening there. And the people in Sydney asked me what format their material should be. And I said, all right, the script should be single-paged in a three-hole in a notebook, and the music should be double-sided in three-ring notebooks. We got to Sydney, and they had laminated and spiral-bound every script and the music. And I said, this is all going to be on a trash heap, not tomorrow, today, because musicals constantly, I always say musicals are probably responsible for all the rainforest disappearing. We use so much paper. And the fact that they so proudly presented this, here's your musical, I went, no, that's not our musical, not yet. So yeah, that process is something you learn to embrace. And I think a lot of young writers also don't understand the fact that, what, you mean I have to redo that or throw it out? How do you throw out your children? You guys are masters at that.
2 or 3 times a day we would do that. I think we all were in love with the show by the time we did our first Black Box production at La Jolla. And we began to have problems when it went to a proscenium stage the year later at La Jolla, and it just played differently. We also had disagreements of opening numbers. So together with Lucy, we must have written about 30. I have a file this big of cut songs. Many more that are than we wrote for the show. And but that's it. As Eric says, it was rewritten, and we always had that outline, that structure that Michael had evolved, and we layered upon
And
it.
even after Broadway, we rewrote and reevaluated.
Yeah.
We just finished a new version.
Well, the proscenium stage at La Jolla, not our favorite production. And then we retooled the whole thing for Australia, and we loved it in Australia. It really worked, and even in a humongous cavern of a theater. It really worked. And then we rewrote it some more. We might have rewritten it for Broadway. And I think with the pressure, we sort of got like 6 months notice you're going to be on Broadway. A theater has opened up. And, but subsequent to Broadway, we wrote it some more. And Broadway doesn't define this show. It's been done all over the world. Lucy's music reaches to the heart in all of these different languages. And, you know, Amy and I and Michael let our words be translated into other languages. Because the music is universal, and however it changes, I'm happy that we originated those moments together with Lucy, even if the words have changed. And it's been in Korea, it's been in Japan, it's been all over Scandinavia,
Germany.
It's been all over Europe, all the Baltic states that Russia ever trampled over. Totally embraced it to their hearts. It's been a huge success over there. And it went back to Australia a second time. And I know that this work is going to outlive us all.
And it's had different directors too, right?
Yeah, different directors. People do it. People have done humongous productions. Right, people have done humongous productions that have dwarfed Broadway, and they've done tiny postage stamp size productions. But it works for every culture slightly differently. But the basic power of that story and of the power of art, poetry, or music, really, which is poetry in a musical, it's abstract, speaks to different ages, different cultures, different countries.
And also in a way, different formats. So some of them have been more like opera.
Right.
And some of them have been more like traditional musical theater. And some of them have been, or will be, more like experimental musical theater. And that's Lucy.
That's right. And the message obviously keeps refreshing its relevance, as we've seen these past 2 months.
Clearly.
It's stunning.
It's always going to be unfortunate.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's time for a revival here now.
If we should ever make an outtakes of all our 30 cut songs.
Why not?
Well, we're following the footsteps of chess, right? I think they had different versions.
I mean, there's all that music that Lucy wrote that no one ever heard.
Before we,
I could read you the
Eric,
titles.
I wanted to just ask you something. Some of the music was very influenced by Russian music, stuff that Lucy wrote. And I think Lucy doesn't read music. Is that true?
Lucy reads music. Yeah, she does read music. She's always given me. Yeah, she's always written down what she wants, even in a basic.
She writes out her
of course,
music. Right.
I get lead sheets from her. But the thing about those lead sheets is we look through them together. Mm-hmm. I play what she's written. She says, "No, I really want that." It's an evolving process. But she's musically literate. The thing about Lucy that I think you were sort of getting at is that, I mean, even the only other score I really know of hers at all is Secret Garden. But listening to her stuff, I think she also has quite an ear for folk music. And whether that became English folk music, Russian folk music, I think there's something, you guys know what I'm talking about. I've seen you nod. There's something about the folk element of Lucy's writing that presents itself, and in this case, in Russian folk music. I, of course, being a smartass, I tried to give it a little bit more of a contemporary Soviet feel, to play with it a little bit, because that's one of my loves is the 20th century Russian composers. But the Russian folk music, the peasant element, the folk element, the heart element, that's Lucy's impulse.
Well, that's how it began, isn't it, Eric?
Yes.
Wasn't she a sister act?
She is
Simon Sisters.
Right.
Yeah. And they sang folk music, and they were quite well known.
The Simon Sisters.
I
quite
believe
well
actually all
known,
three of them did. Yeah, right, exactly. But I'm just saying that she has a sense of how folk music works in terms of storytelling, and it's always one of her.
She
One of her
really gets
influences.
excited about folk
But she
music.
also knew about Prokofiev and Tchaikovsky and the whole Kabalevsky,
Exactly,
the whole
Rachmaninoff.
spectrum of Russian music. And I think that if you were really to analyze those scores by a musicologist, you'd see how literate they are.
But
Yeah, absolutely.
the folk thing was
And
really
as I said, I think we were
the folk
co-conspirators.
thing was really big for her. I remember she was like a hungry child researching what we could do for. Do you remember the song "Women and Little Children"? It opens the second act, and
Yes.
I just remember her very eagerly diving into Russian folk music to make sure that she was being that she was honoring what would have been at the time, and then just putting her own spin on it. So she really wanted to be both historically correct and emotionally correct.
The final song that we all collaborated on for the show was post-Broadway, was a song called Home Where the Lilacs Grow,
Right.
Which is a folk song. And it takes place when Zhivago is being a doctor on the World War I front, and the nurses are homesick for home, dealing with all these wounded and dying soldiers every single day. They think of the home front, and then some good news comes. And that replaced a different song that we had in Australia, and then a song that we were forced to use on Broadway, which was the theme song from the movie, which I loathed.
Yes.
I'll just be blunt about it.
We
I
all
loathed
agree.
having it in our show
All
because
agree.
it disrupted Lucy's vision.
And it didn't fit with Lucy's vision.
It didn't fit. It was a stupid song, and I didn't want it in there. And the producers, Lorraine, insisted that this would be the panacea to everything. I think it wrecked the show.
It's a beautiful song for somewhere else.
No, we know.
Yeah, for the movie.
But what was so beautiful about this show is that we didn't go to the movie. We went back to the book, and Michael invented a new dramatic structure, and the score matched. And the minute you stuck that stupid song in, it became, they're adapting the movie. And it was never that.
Exactly, Michael. You couldn't have said it better. I agree wholeheartedly.
Well, I'm still pissed about it.
Yeah,
Well,
we all are.
I'd be.
And it's gone, by the way, in the latest version
it's
that's
gone?
going around.
Yes, gone, gone.
Well, I gave the book to my father-in-law to read. Now he's just a kind of a lovely doctor, small town doctor, and he doesn't read
Perfect.
stuff like that. And his comment when I came to visit, he'd read about 50 pages, and he said, "Are you going to have all of these characters in this story?" I said, "Don't worry, Byron, we'll work it out." He said, "Yeah, because I was going to say."
There is a tradition in Russian literature of embracing a huge
So
world.
you're ready to tackle War and Peace, the musical? Is that it?
Someone did it. Someone did it, and someone did it smartly. They took
Oh, right,
a
the
tiny
one,
section
Natasha
of the
Pierre and
poem.
the
The
comet.
great
Yeah,
comet.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and again, I tell my students that I'm teaching that boy, that was a syllogism, wasn't it? I tell my kids that if I were given the assignment to write Les Mis as a musical, I would have chosen 50 pages of it to musicalize, not the whole thing, because then you're stuck sort of, giving little lip service to moments instead of really delving in.
Michael Weller found a way to include everything that was important and parse away, boil down the stuff that wasn't, to just put it to the side, and then create some
Yes,
important things.
That was the spine of the whole thing.
Yeah.
That was the spine. And, a collaboration means that everybody sort of has to give up a bit of themselves to join together and make something that none of you would have created on your own. And that wouldn't have been possible if the music hadn't unified all those voices.
I knew that there had been previous versions of it, and I knew that Arthur wrote some of them, and I was very curious to know what they were like, after the fact. I obviously didn't want to see them before, but when I was all done, I thought to myself, I mean, Arthur's a very smart guy. And I thought, like, how did he solve this stuff?
Well, I think what they did, from what I understand, was that they spent a lot more time on the backstory. They spent a lot of time on Lara being abused by Komarovsky. And we dealt with that after the fact. We went back from the gunshot where she tries to shoot Komarovsky and dealt with it in that wonderful song that Amy basically covered the whole backstory in one lyric.
Amazing. Yeah.
I tweaked it a little, but basically that was her totally grasping the whole backstory, and it took care of it. And I think they spent half of Act 1 on that backstory, and then everything else that followed was rushed.
You're right.
I never saw any of the other versions, so I have no idea.
Lucy's memory of all those songs is encyclopedic. She'll turn to me and say, remember those measures from that? And I honestly don't remember, but she has every song in her head. I'm sorry, Michael Weller, what were you going to say?
No, I was remembering that outline. I'd forgotten that I wrote that outline because I remember being I said I'd think about it and I'd do an outline of my idea and then I'd give it to Lucy and see if they liked it. But I remember I was skiing and my kids, who were little at the time and very rambunctious and constantly fighting because there were two boys, they were like 5 and 7. And I was waiting for them to put on their ski stuff so we could go out on the slopes, and they just wouldn't. I was, yelling at them and trying to snapping to it, being not a very good father. And I just finally said to them, you guys, the hell with you, go outside and play. I don't care. And as I said that, that's the moment I thought, Jesus, a gunshot. That's how it starts. And I sat down. This was without thinking. And I wrote the outline in about an hour. And by then the kids were going, when are we going to ski? When are we going to ski? I said, okay, now we can go skiing.
That's right. It was really not an outline. It was really a treatment.
Yeah, kind of.
And by the way, it's in the Lincoln Center Library for the Performing Arts. I put all my papers in there.
Wow.
And I think people have already used it as research because I've gotten calls.
Wow.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
But anyway, I have the recording here, and I was just going to mention the songs. Maybe we could recall how they happened. Two Worlds was like the third or fourth opening number that we came up with.
Oh, I have it too.
The first one was something. The first one was something about Christmas.
Yes.
And Lucy wrote a delightful Christmas song.
It was in 3. I remember that. It was
right, but we decided we didn't want to do about Christmas, and we needed to really set the political situation. So we wrote something Under the Russian Sky, and that was replaced with Two Worlds. And then Two Worlds became an epic 15-minute long number. Who Is She? That was Michael's idea, the title.
After the gunshot.
And he said, no, you just... Right. And then Lucy wrote the music. And then we filled in the lyrics to that music. But she came up with that whole questioning tone that Yuri had. He's supposed to be marrying Tanya, and at the same time, just as he's getting married, he's being totally attracted to this woman who just shot someone.
And the music is deliciously takes inspiration from Russia's penchant for Orientalism in its melodies. It's really.
And you know what else? That song has a lot of dialogue in it too. Yep. So she wrote this incredible underscoring to keep the excitement and tension going under all the dialogue. It's a Godsend was a big production number, but it had a few surprises too, and I don't remember. That came fairly early on. When the music played, that was Amy's. Watch the Moon was another idea that Michael had, and I think we wrote that in the bedroom.
I beg your pardon?
While they were out there having cappuccino.
Ixnay on the bedroom bed.
Right. Then there were a million World War I songs, Forward March for the Tsar. But then Lucy wanted to do that whole sort of cantata for the soldiers in a foxhole.
That was
fun.
Waiting to go to die.
That was
That's
fun.
amazing. And really, that's an incredible work of music. Talk about that, Eric. How did that evolve?
I was thinking about it this morning, knowing we were going to meet, and I'm a little hazy about it. But Lucy decided that she wanted something that had a strong polyphonic quality, had different parts that fit on top of each other, each one adding on as the soldiers added on. And we sort of discussed what each sort of snippet would be like, and how it would grow. But basically, I just took that direction to sort of put it together. It was a very much like a mosaic, and it sort of, I needed to do it. But the pieces were hers. So I basically just welded it and made it fit together.
Yeah, and it really gave us the whole spectrum of the feeling of those soldiers. So
Yep.
some praying to God, some wishing they were elsewhere, some plotting to take their neighbor's gun if they died. Someone night, and then suddenly they get the call to go out to no man's land, and you don't know who gets killed and who doesn't.
Yeah. No, it's a really exciting moment. I've always liked that.
Wonderful first act closing in this house, which is preceded by a little lullaby for the child.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how that evolved, Amy? I don't think that was originally part of it.
The child
I
being
think Lucy had
in
an
there?
instinct that the son
Being
had
in
to
there.
sing. Yes, I think the two of you
Well,
wrote
there was a lot
that.
of debate.
The house don't be
There's a lot of
frightened.
debate, right, about
Right.
whether you could have a child speak directly to his own home, and whether that was going to be emotionally real or look like some kind of set up gimmicky thing. And we played around with a lot of different versions of the lyric for that too. But if you're a child, man, I think about this in relation to all the Ukrainians who just were ripped from their homes, right? If you say to a child who's 6 years old,
Oh yeah.
we might never be coming back here, so say goodbye to your house. What
Right. At
Yeah.
this point, Zhivago had married into a family of white Russians, of royalty, and the Bolsheviks had taken over at this point. They realized for their lives they had to flee. That was the end of Act One. It starts with this very childlike melody that Lucy came up with. Then it goes from family member to family member saying goodbye to their homes, finally to the whole
town.
The entire
element
community.
of society that's
Uprooted.
been and sneaking off to a train, and then it joins with the Bolshevik anthem, and the two that's counterpoint.
Right.
Two songs dovetail. It's masterful.
And something
and-
we never talked to, well, I mentioned it a number of times, but I still insist I'd like to see this, is that the Perfect World was an unusual song for Lucy.
That's what I was going to go
Yes.
back to get. We skipped it.
Because I think we missed an opportunity with that song, because I felt the orchestration, the background of it should be found objects. It should not just be instruments. It should be metal scraping on metal and clanking and something very
Like those weird Harry Partch instruments, those homemade instruments, right?
anything like, yeah, but I mean even more, like brutalistic noises. So it would be something that was so startling to an audience that like you never hear in a musical. Then suddenly, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But to give Lucy her due, just because I did miss the song when they cut it for Broadway, and we have
We
put it,
stupidly cut it. Yes,
and we have
now
put
it's
it back. But again, Lucy's instinct, where her melodies tend to soar and have great leaps and stuff. This was all about little nitty half steps, and it literally de-romanticized anything. It was almost not music anyway. It was anti-music.
Right.
So you had da 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 da, just like little flies and gnats. It dehumanized it, and I thought that was a very smart impulse.
Well, she was very influenced by that whole constructivist thing at that point.
Mm-hmm.
She was always keyed into something in Russian music.
But I think, my point is that if we push that a little bit more and make
Yep.
it more
We,
aggressive,
we still can, Michael.
well,
it ain't over yet.
I'll
There will
encourage
always
you to
be
do
an
that,
production.
because I think, no, it's a remarkable moment. And it was not presented as a remarkable moment. It was presented as too much of another song. Although, you could see its originality, but I think there was something to it that could have been really mentioned, noticed, notable.
Yeah.
Right. Then we used to open Act Two with a comedy number that made us all laugh. But it was a one-joke song. And we came up with something else in Australia, and Lucy really went back to that folk theme. Women and little children, but she loved what was it called? The Ukrainian women's
It's the
choir?
Bulgarian women's choir.
Women's
right.
choir. We
Oh,
listened
yeah.
to a lot of Bulgarian women's choir music, and she came up with something really robust and earthy about how the women have to take over the society because all the men are dead or off to war.
Right.
And it worked great to reopen the second act.
It's great.
What's next?
Wouldn't
And
this be amazing to do this in the when the
we
Ukraine?
had a wonderful song for Pasha, who became the leader of the rebels.
Strelnikov.
And, became Strelnikov and became bloodthirsty and possibly motivated by the loss of his wife. And that's a very brutal and right. Lucy wanted that song to end, and Des wanted it to end with Strelnikov putting a bullet into the brain of a soldier.
Des loved killing people on stage.
I'm not sure which.
Yeah, that was a problem.
Yes, he
that
did.
Was a
That and
problem.
fire.
Well, yeah, audiences weren't so keen on seeing so much gore.
Well, I think in the version that we've now licensed, by the way, it's been done all over the world, and now it's going to be done in the United States.
Really?
Yeah,
Concord
making it
is picked up the rights, and now it will be available for productions all over this country as well. We changed the ending and made it the musical ending, and then the gunshot, which is fine. And then we get into all these fantastic ballads that Lucy just excels at. Love Finds You, It Comes as No Surprise, On the Edge of Time, just these amazing love songs, which is kind of what everyone's been waiting for. And they're just overwhelming, one after another.
And we did still sprinkle in the second act, a number of high tension moments, like Ashes and Tears.
Yes.
That is a
Passion and Tears.
Zhivago on the
I remember
Run
we
song.
came up with that at the table.
Because you can't do ballad
Hawaii,
after
right.
ballad after ballad after ballad. Audiences
No.
won't stand for it.
But it happens to have this remarkable grouping of ballads in Act Two. There's kind of a rule in Broadway that you could have one ballad per show. But in a Lucy show, you have more than one.
And they're all equally beautiful.
And they
That's what
have
you're
different
there for.
they have different feels also. They're not the same song. I
Right.
mean, they have different.
And they're all written for character. They directly speak to that character
Exactly.
that's singing.
Yeah.
I mean, the women's duet, It Comes as No Surprise, is not a ballad, but it's a remarkable duet for 2 points of women, both internalizing their thoughts
About loving the same man.
Really.
Yeah.
about loving the same
And each-
man.
And finding that that's their bond, which is very, 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 what do you call it? Subversive.
It's subversive.
But I think what you say about her
Or it's
writing
a kind of
each
surrender.
song, yeah, that each character has their own voice through the music and the lyrics. A lot of shows, since I see a lot of shows, it all sounds the same. They're not differentiating the characters. And this and Secret Garden are extraordinary.
They're authorial. They sound like the author singing,
Exactly.
right? Yeah. And these all come from character and from the heart and from putting yourself in that character's shoes.
And also,
in that
because there
moment.
were a number of us, we all had to approve. You sort of had to fight for what you had created. And that may not be the case in every musical, right? You really had to defend why
Right.
this was working, why this made sense for this character at this time, every time.
That's why collaboration is important.
That's what theater's all about. This has been extraordinary. I can't wait to show it to Lucy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to episode 4 of the special Lucy Simon celebration. Please stay tuned for the final episode coming up next. Tremendous thanks to our guests, Michael Korie, Amy Powers, Michael Weller, and Eric Stern. Huge gratitude to Sierra Boggess and Ramin Karimloo for singing On the Edge of Time, accompanied by Joseph Thalkin, with narration by me, Lucy Boyle. This episode is produced by Dori Berenstein, Alan Seals, and Kimberly Garris for the Broadway Podcast Network. Executive producers are Loraine Boyle and Liz Armstrong. Associate producer is Henny Konisberg. This series is edited by Alan Seals and Dori Berenstein. Thank you to Victoria Traub, Sean Flavin, and Concord Music for their tremendous support and partnership on this very special project. Find out more about Lucy Simon, how to support the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and more ways to listen to this podcast by visiting bpn.fm/Lucy Simon.